because we're on solid state, and maybe I'm used to like
No.
hearing that I'm not
I
supposed
should. I
to.
don't even. That's like the first time I've ever even said that. So I don't know why I even brought that up. But yeah, we're rolling here. So no countdown today.
No countdown.
No countdown. Today I'm sitting here with Garrett from Silent Planet, aka Silent Garrett, if you're on the Twitter. We're here to talk aliens.
Yeah. Oh man, I would love to talk aliens.
No, I say that because obviously, like the latest single you guys had was Anunnaki, and I don't know if you guys used that title as for some reason as far as like alien-based lure or lore.
Yeah,
But
we did. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a concept record about aliens, so definitely very
Oh, yeah.
having
Okay.
having a lot of fun with that.
That makes a lot of sense. But for those who are unaware, the Anunnaki are like, and you can kind of help fill me in
Yeah.
where I have the gaps. But from what I remember on the Ancient Aliens shows, Sukulu would say that they're like the kind of race of people that live inside or inside the Earth, or possibly were from another planet, and that's kind of where the human form came
Brought
from.
us here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think with a lot of lore, it's like there's depending on which culture you're pulling from, like if is it just Egypt or is it like more general, it kind of varies with what people think, what people are thinking when they're talking Anunnaki. A lot of, I think, the first thing you'll find when you Google will have something to do with like ancient gods and stuff.
Yeah.
But um, yeah, in my case, it's actually much closer to what you said, beings that brought us here who live in the earth and who are still maybe here. And
Wild shit.
my belief is that that it yeah, I don't think humans originated on Earth. I think humans were brought here from a different place. I think there was I think there was life on Mars a long time ago, before, and Mars was more habitable to human life than even Earth is now. At some point, it was, of course, that was before its atmosphere was deteriorated by the sun, and well, that's what most people think. There's a lot of theories on why, but um, yeah, and the Anunnaki are still beings that are still here, and that's what I'm specifically referencing in our record. And I grew up in a small town in Northern California, very different than if you're not from California, it's not what people think of when they think of California. It's not like beaches and
Yeah.
movie stars and Ferraris. It's more like Oregon probably, and it's only a couple hours from Oregon where I grew up. But that concept was known as the Lemurians where I grew up. That they were these beings that lived inside of Mount Shasta, which is this
Hmm.
massive volcano that's to the north of the town. And so growing up, there was uh, a lot of that kind of lore that I would hear. There's actually I guess a cult, so to speak, that came around that called the I Am activity. Um, but yeah, the whole record that we are putting out in on November 3rd is about uh, a kid who went missing in 1996. It's a semi-true, semi-fictional. I guess I'll let people decide how true it is. That's probably something that people would debate, but it's a story of a kid who went missing in the Northern California area around Humboldt County.
Mm.
And that whole area is also known as the Emerald Triangle. It's
Right.
where like the majority of like outdoor like weed, as well as other not just weed, but like mushrooms, psilocybin stuff comes from. And that's where I grew up. And I think previous records of ours kind of focused on more historic topics and different things around the world. And this one kind of like I guess this record you could say kind of brings me back home to where I grew up.
Interesting. Yeah. Have you kind of, I mean, when did you start kind of like, when did aliens come on the map for you being from Northern California and dealing with that area? Like,
Yeah. So I think where I grew up, a lot of people have sightings. I want to say that it's like I actually there's a pretty popular YouTube channel, and there's a video called "The Most Paranormal Place in the World," as far as like sightings go, and that was Mount Shasta, which is
mm,
like where that's like the mountain near where I grew up. It's an active volcano, And so I think I always kind of had an awareness of it, and it's a particularly like religious kind of hotbed. Like even like in like the Christian world, there's this huge like mega church there, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just kind of it's a weirdly like spiritual place, you could say. It's also a place that like you'll meet a lot of, I guess you could say, like hippies or like people who are really into like crystals and stuff, who like come from different parts of the world to like for the resonance and the frequency of the mountain and stuff. And it's just kind of it's kind of known for that. It's kind of a it's like it's like if Southern California is like the cool popular kid, like Northern California is like the weird kid who's in the back of class like drawing like
Yeah.
creepy things or something. Like where I grew up specifically in NorCal is just it's an odd place to be sure, culturally and otherwise. And so that's where kind of this concept album takes place.
Interesting. Yeah. I recently went out to California for the first time in like 10 years. In August or whatever to hang out with Dylan, my partner, and Lambgoat over there, and we did some work and kind of hung
Awesome.
out in San Francisco. And that was the first time that I'd ever
Yeah.
really been to like Northern California. I definitely had gone to like LA and San Diego prior to that, but yeah, it's completely different
So different.
than SoCal. And you know, I live in Florida, so I know a lot of people have an idea of what they think Florida is, especially recently in the
Yeah.
last couple of years. But the same
Yeah.
thing,
The whole Florida man
yeah.
mythology
Well, that's
has
a real
grown.
thing. I mean, that is a real thing. But like
Yeah.
everyone thinks that we're one way or another from whatever some media sources say this, that, or the other. Same with like
Right.
California. But I did notice that when I went over to California, I was like, it's not as bad as everyone says it is on, everywhere online or on TV or wherever you're at. But I was like, and they all had, you know, ideas of what Florida was, as
Yeah.
everyone probably does. And I was like, it's nothing like that. It's the same. It's kind of like me having this kind of like whole like, like, oh, this is not as bad as the news is making it out to be. So it was kind of cool
Yeah.
to be up in Northern California. How far away is like the area you're from like the
Yeah.
Bay Area?
So yeah, from where I grew up, Redding, San Francisco, you would pretty much just go east to Sacramento, which would take, as you know, the capital
Mm-hmm.
of California. And the I think that would take you about 90 minutes, maybe, depending. I mean, heavily depending on traffic. You're
Right,
obviously
right,
talking
right.
about some of the worst traffic on earth. San Francisco, Silicon Valley, San Jose, that whole
Yeah.
thing. The traffic's insane. But you go to Sacramento, east, about 90 minutes, and then you would drive about 2.5 hours north, to get up to Redding, California, which kind of sits between Mount Lassen and Mount Shasta. So it's a very beautiful place. It's very hot, very commonly
Mm.
110 degrees days in the summer. Always on fire. People know it for that too.
Yeah.
Always on fire. Um, Especially in recent years. They've had a lot of issues with it's just there's so much forest and it's so dry that like one spark can basically create a crisis for 2 months kind of
Yeah.
thing. But yeah, so that's kind of in relation to San Francisco, where it is.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I'm more familiar with Oregon than I am California because I have family that lives in Northern Oregon,
Oh, cool.
Southern Washington, like the Portland, Vancouver
Yeah,
area.
yeah,
But cool. So let's. I want to dive more into like this is so off topic from probably the normal interview you're about to do for this press run, but let's talk about where the humans came from because I also,
yeah,
you know what I mean. And the thing is, I guess this kind of correlates with you guys having that label as like a Christian band for so many years because you guys,
yeah,
some people just run with some things and bands get labeled as one thing when they're not necessarily that one thing. But you guys are
yes,
you are signed to Solid State, UMFD and or UNFD, and yeah. So like, because I also think the same thing too. Like when I look around, I'm like, well, we're totally different than anything on this planet. Although we are similar to like primates in a way.
yeah,
We're similar, but we're also not. You know what I mean? We're not similar in a lot of ways, but it would make sense that like an intelligent being coming from another place, and then all of a sudden we pop up, for one reason or another. But I'd like to expound on that theory with you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I would love that. Yeah. First, I guess just to speak to the Christian thing, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. It's I
You've
think
said
it's
it
always
before.
been a
Yeah.
really it's really interesting when you're a band who has, we've had you know, a lot of the dudes in this band have been in this band for over 10 years.
Hmm.
And you have people in the band who have never considered themselves like religious or Christian, and then they're just being told constantly, "You're a Christian band," and they're like it's a weird phenomenon, and I do understand where it comes from. I think being in a label that had like traditionally kind of had like a Christian
Hmm.
had like a Christian thing to it. I know Solid State Records is not that way anymore. And in fact, I think I think they've kind of gone out of their way to sign like a diverse
Yeah.
backgrounds of artists and stuff. But that as well as I do reference a lot of Bible tech. I mean, a lot of stuff in general. Like I for a while I did a thing where I'd like source the lyrics, so there'd be like footnotes on the lyrics, so that people
Oh,
could like
cool.
dig in further. And I think that some of what happened, I realize, is a lot of people don't fully maybe understand what's happening with like footnotes, if that makes sense. I think a lot of folks had um I think it was common that people were mistaking like a footnote source for an endorsement. So
Yeah, I get what you're
um
saying. I get what you're
like
saying.
I wrote a song about American consumerism, and I quoted Karl Marx, who obviously has a lot of critiques of like consumer capitalism. And I got so many people being like, "Oh, so you're like a Marxist now or something?" And it's like I think it's difficult to understand that for a lot of the music community, because people are so outspoken. When you start trying to do something like sourcing something, which there's some nuance there, like I'm not saying this is the answer to the whole world. I'm saying like this is an interesting thought that
Hmm.
like inspired it. And I just simply wanted to do that because I believe that art is not like, whether it's writing a book or a song or painting. I think that like we're always being influenced by stuff, whether or not we choose to be conscious of it. No one just like creates something out of thin air.
Right.
We're it's a constant dialogue. So I thought, hey, I'll put sources, whatever. But it kind of led to this wild thing where, like, yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've even seen on Lambgoat being like, hey, check out the new Silent Planet, and in the comments, people are like, fuck this Christian band, no way. And it's like, cool, we're not. And then on the flip side, we put out a song that might have cursing, and people are like, you guys were supposed to be a Christian band, you let me down, you failed me. And it's like, on both sides, you have people mad at you for this thing that you never asked for, this
Yeah.
label. So that's a kind of interesting thing that we don't have to get further into, but wanted to speak to that. On the front of where humans come
Yeah,
from.
back to the question. But I mean,
Yeah,
I
back to the
I
question. Yeah,
definitely
we're
appreciate the
we're
explanation because obviously, like that does tie into like with how you deal on a day to day basis over the last
yeah,
few years. So like, by all means, like that's great. But let's get into
yeah,
the meat, the nitty gritty meat and potatoes.
yeah, yeah. The nitty gritty. I would love that. To get into the nitty gritty. Where people come from. It's funny because as you know, for a really long time, the prevailing thought within a lot of I mean, not just I don't think just like only atheism, but say for like secular or non-religious thinkers, the prevailing thought was that life emerged from a process of complex evolution
Hmm.
into what we have today, which is a this concept that that there was a big bang, and that this everything that we see is kind of the
Evolution of
completion
something.
of a bunch of random things. Like
Yeah.
we are the 0.0000001% chance of this like complex thinking beings, this life in the universe. And that whole idea is now being kind of subverted by this new thought that we are actually like living in a simulation, and that's become possibly a more common explanation for our existence. And I think that's partially because life is very, very, very complex. It's like hard. it's hard for people to look at the complexity of life on this earth and think like, oh, this is completely random. Like there's no intention because life is just very fragile. If we were like a little bit further from the sun or a little bit closer, we're either burned or freezing. And
Mm-hmm.
and as much as you could say, yeah, well, we're this we are the most random thing. People are, then they did like the double slit experiment, if you're familiar, but basically getting into some crazy quantum stuff where they're like, wow, matter itself behaves differently whether or not it's observed. Kind of, we finally got the answer to the age-old question: if a tree falls in the woods, and no one's there to observe it, does it make a sound or whatever? We
Mm-hmm.
have the answer now, probably, and the answer is probably no, it doesn't make a sound if there's no perception of it, which is kind of a weird thought. But so all that to say, that led me into like asking other questions about the nature of our world, including like, do we have uh like where did we come from if the if it's not a simulation, or maybe it is a simulation, but maybe we were simulated on other planets first, maybe we're simulated in other dimensions. And so yeah, I believe that life was brought here by makers essentially. And I think it's really um I certainly am not going to try to have all the answers, but I do believe that in a lot of mythology, whether it's the Egyptians or it's even in the Bible, also the Jewish Torah, of
Mm-hmm.
course, Genesis 6 talks about the Nephilim, which are these beings that, supposedly are came from above and then, mated with the I think it says like the daughters of man, or just humankind.
Mm-hmm.
These beings created us, and now we're here, and we're like the result of this of basically like half. Well, the Nephilim were like these half breeds of like humans, and then these like alien creatures, or these divine creatures, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
And that whole concept always really influenced. It was just really interesting to me at a young age, where like, I did grow up in a Christian environment, and you're kind of told, oh, we have all the answers of the world was created in a literal 7 days,
Right.
which it's not even a biblical interpretation. Anyone who I think has read the Bible and understands what the function of a genre is understands that the whole biblical literalism thing is actually like kind of a fool's concept. But regardless of that, reading about these legends about these ancient beings and all this stuff just really like started started a lot for me. And then there was that UFO footage that was released, and I want to say like right as the pandemic was kind of hitting full swing
Which
in
one?
2020. I don't know. Do you recall that?
Which one?
It was the Tic
Yeah,
Tac.
Tic
I
Tac.
think they call it the Tic Tac footage, where
Yeah, I
the
saw
thing
that. It was like
they
a
finally get a
gyroscope or
lock on
something.
it, and the pilots are like cheering, and they're like, "Oh my God, we got it!" And there's been all this footage of these things that are moving between planes, which is to say, like between land, like the air and the water, and they're
Mm-hmm.
not slowing down at all. And then yeah, you just read more and more of the interviews with different folks, and you just hear over and over again people are saying like this became a common thing for pilots to just
Yeah.
encounter these crafts that were
Yeah.
just completely
Out
completely
of this world type.
unlike
Yeah.
anything that we have technologically. And they can't be drones because they've analyzed it, and it's like it's has too much substance, it's too big and it's moving at too much of a speed to be a drone. And it can't be a blimp, and it's like we just they go through it over and over again until it's like there's something else to this whole thing that like we're trying to still figure out, but that just kind of opened my eyes. Like there's evidence of these things happening, whether you make them out to be aliens or like whether it's like a psyop,
Yeah.
like that's being committed within the government. There's something happening.
Yeah,
And I
something's up
think
there for sure. Something's up
I,
there for
I
sure because
think
I see
that
it all the time.
if you don't believe that our government's like trying to pull an elaborate ruse on us, you have to believe it to some degree in the reality of what's happening. If it's not,
Well, yeah, not even based on aliens, but like they've done it in other
yeah,
in other areas of you know today, like in ways that you would never even. I don't even want to bring up COVID or anything like that because that's a whole different topic. But like they cover up weird shit that they don't even need to really cover up. So,
Oh
you
yeah.
know what I mean?
Well, and
Like,
for a long time there was crazy cover-ups. There's people that talked about it, were heavily persecuted by the
mm-hmm.
government. And that's a whole thing. Real quick, I have to step out for 1 second.
Grab your
Sorry.
food. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. That was actually not even the thing. I think that's in 7 minutes. But yeah, it's all that to say, it's just it's been interesting to see, the public dialogue around it change from like aliens being something that you would expect someone who's just like maybe severely mentally ill to like
Yeah,
to be talking about an abduction. It's changed
a little bit.
to where
Yeah,
now like there seems to be some credibility around the subject, and as far as David Grush even testifying in front of Congress. And that's kind of been a weird thing too, is I started writing this alien record like 2 years ago, before I would have ever imagined like, wow, now this is becoming like a this is like happening in front of Congress and stuff,
yeah. Thanks, Tom DeLonge.
yeah, right. Yeah, and it's I and everyone has different views of it. What my view is, and kind of what the aliens are within this concept record, is more than actually extraterrestrials. They would be considered ultra terrestrials, which is beings that are from a different beings that are from a different dimension, essentially.
Yes,
Is
yes.
is my thinking, and that is my belief. I think what we're seeing is so as you've probably heard before, a lot of, or I think I mean, you can't really prove this kind of thing, but the most common belief of in quantum physics is that there's like probably 10 dimensions of
Yeah.
like existence, and that we live within one that we can see like three dimensions, but there's a lot of other dimensions that we just simply can't perceive, and we're sort of, I think you could say we're sort of bound within the dimensions that we can perceive. And um,
Do you think
I
we?
believe these beings are ultra terrestrials, which is to say, not that they couldn't be coming from other planets, or whatever is on the other side. But my view is that they are that we're
Transcending?
seeing things that can go in and out
Right,
of what we're able to perceive.
right.
Almost like you could consider it like they're invisible, and then they're visible, and then they're invisible, then they're visible. And it's not to say that they stop existing. They just simply they're moving in and out of a plane that we can understand,
Yeah,
whether or not
dimensions.
it's intentional or not, or like who they really are. But I think that it's also very possible that we're seeing us, that like we're when what we're witnessing is like us from in like a future that's now like able to move through time space. And there's a few different ways that people think we could be moving through time space. Eventually, one would be that we can like project like a rift, or
Mm-hmm.
like a
Like a portal.
project like a wormhole, and we
Mm-hmm.
can move through it. And then of course there's the idea of 0 point energy that would make it maybe possible for that. And then there's the idea of uh, but then there's the idea that these things are wholly unlike us. These beings are just like they're essentially they're above us. They have sort of their expanded powers. And when you think about all, I think for a long time people would think about texts that talk about angels and stuff, and demons and God and
Right.
whatever, and would think, okay, so that's religion. And then we would hear about like spacecrafts and little green dudes, and we'd be like, that's sci-fi. And we create these categories,
And you have also like
and we're like,
ghosts and all the other things too that are unexplained.
Ghost,
Yeah,
yeah,
but they're
Ghost is a
all
big one.
kind of like they're all borderline in the same soup. You know what I mean? They're all like kind
They
of
are, yeah.
unexplainable.
And I think because we live in this kind of religiously dominated world, I think it was kind of perceived, well, okay, so all this stuff about angels and God, this is like real and important for your life, and whatever. And then the sci-fi thing we put in a box of like, well, that's science fiction. That's just like fun,
Right.
that's like Halloween
Yes.
movie stuff. Um, and we create these categories, but like these are artificial categories created in a culture that has a vested interest in us believing some stuff and
Right.
not believing other stuff.
For
And so
control
I
or for some other reason, it could they don't
yeah.
because I also
Oh yeah.
think like I saw a documentary on light pollution many years ago, and for those who aren't aware, light pollution is like the light being refracted back to you off of like dust particles and everything like that, which makes it
Yeah.
hard for you to really see like stars at night in cities.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you're out in like the wilderness where there's less light, artificial light,
you can see everything.
way more. Yeah, you can see like the Milky Way and shit. And you know, some people think that, well, this documentary had a little piece of it in there that some people think that that is some kind of control situation. So you're not necessarily looking up and then like seeing all that awesome, or you know, that awe, you know, being in awe of like the skies and the stars. So you can stop like thinking what's out there, but also like it also expands your mind to realize like, dude, you're fucking nothing. Because like if you can see the Milky Way from your backyard,
Oh yeah.
it'll put you into place real quick. You know what I mean? You're like, oh fuck, I'm really
Oh, it's
nothing.
insane. It's very humbling to realize that this whole yeah, we are a speck within a speck within a speck. Like we're like a molecule on a piece of sand on a beach,
Yeah.
you know, as far as the size of this. I think this is my
The food.
non-false alarm.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Hey,
Yeah, we're back.
I'm back.
Fuck. So yeah, when did fuck. We were talking about aliens, but specifically, interdimensional shit. What I wanted to get into with that is, so like, I also grew up in somewhat of a religious situation, and I did a lot of my like in the Catholic faith, and I did a lot of like my confirmation and baptism and all that stuff as like a high school student, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, when the religious situation started coming in, it's like, yeah, that's cool. It's a great structure for your life and like rules to live by and everything like that. And I don't knock it for that. And there's many people in my family that are still down that path. But for some weird reason, you know, you start asking questions when you're younger, 16, 17 years old, and they're like, oh, you just got to have faith. And I'm like, that's not necessarily working for me right now. I have like all these questions about, you know, I mean, more deep than like, there's not, how big is that ark that Noah built? You know, there are bigger in-depth questions than just that, although like that is a
Yeah, like
question.
did he get two of every animal ever?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, like whatever. And, but I
Right.
mean, with that being said, as I've gotten older, and like you brought up like the crystals and rock stuff and like frequencies and like magnetism and all that other shit.
Yeah.
As I've gotten older, it sounds so weird to say out loud, but all that stuff makes way more sense than just believing about a man in the sky kind of thing. And then I started thinking, I'm like, well, maybe they're the same, and that's just the way that like religious people like to interpret it, because they need it to have like a man in the sky thing. But in
Metaphors.
reality, it's just some kind of weird energy situation that, and again, like dimensions and that we can't access or we can't view, and you know,
Yeah.
you got all this other shit going on. Then you got like people like, and this is gonna sound horrible, you have people like Alex Jones that are talking about it all the time, but then you have obviously people like Alex Jones doing other things, whereas like he says a lot of
That
things
ruined
that,
their credibility.
right, he
Yeah.
says a lot of things that have been dead on, and then you know he says some things that aren't really.
Yeah, the government's
Dead on.
turning the frogs gay, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't be agreeing with this guy at all. But then you see other stuff, you're
It's
like,
like, oh, the water
oh,
is making them. Okay,
yeah.
yeah, okay. And like, you know, speaking of which, not to get off topic too much about that, but when we were in San Francisco, we did drive Tahoe within that time frame. So we passed. God, I can't remember what that place is where Alex, where all the guys would go and worship the owl god in the woods.
Oh yeah, the secret society.
Yeah.
I don't remember where that is, but yeah, I saw a good there's a horror movie about that too.
Well, he exposed it or whatever, and we were walking this trail because I wanted to see some sequoias out there in California while we were there, and that was like one of the places, and I was like, Bohemian Grove. That's
Bohemian
what it was.
Grove, yeah.
And
That shit's crazy.
yeah, there was a sign that's like, you're walking the Bohemian Grove Trail, and I was like, I turned to Dylan and I go, dude, if we go off base somewhere, we might roll up on like the elite talking.
Yeah,
about some
might
shit.
see Jeb Bush sacrificing a boar in the woods. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, all that shit kind of makes it more fathomable. Like, yeah, the elite or the people in power, whoever those people may be, aren't necessarily like the government or everybody in the government, but clearly there are some people that could be privy to some information, to some kind of other technology, to some other
Oh, totally.
communication with other beings off planet or in a different dimension. And this is the weirdest conversation I've ever had on the Vanflip, but that makes more sense. Like the Matrix movie makes more sense. You know, like we could be in that kind of situation where, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
we're being harvested for some weird energy thing, or and then we're just
Oh,
living in a
totally.
simulation, or that we're just here in like a biodome environment where they can come and either pluck us when they need us, or as an experiment situation. But there's just too many like sightings that aren't explained, things that aren't explained. The government
Yeah.
doesn't talk about a lot of
Oh,
things
totally.
like that, so it's kind of strange. But and we don't go to the moon. I find it super weird we don't go to the moon.
Yeah. We haven't been to the moon in like 50 years or something.
Yeah, I
And
know.
it's like you would think that I mean like most technology, right? Like usually you do things and then we perfect it and it gets easier and it gets cheaper and
Hmm.
we expedite the process. And here it is like it's like, oh, so it's still incredibly difficult to go to the moon, I guess. So difficult that we just don't do it, I
Yeah,
guess.
and like before they were doing it on
I
like
think they are now though. That's what they're saying,
they have a
right?
plan
They're
to
going
maybe,
back
yeah.
now.
But before they were getting to the moon on like the size of a computer that was in like a Casio uh, calculator or something like that. Now we have, you know,
Oh yeah,
technology is
our toys have better computer. Like
yeah.
toys for 3-year-olds have better computers now.
Just makes
Yeah.
no sense to me that they just went for a handful of years and were like, yep, all right, done that. Everything up there is discovered and whatever. But not saying that there's a moon base on the dark side of the moon or anything like that, but just weird that we've never been back. Um, I watched this, speaking of fucking aliens thing, I watched this show and I started watching it and it was so annoying for the first couple episodes because it was just so dumb to me. But like Invasion on Apple TV, it's about like basically aliens showing up. And
Is it good? I've heard about that actually specifically.
yeah, I mean it's I'm into it now, and I watched the whole first season. I'm in the second season, but the aliens, or the alien to them is kind of like well, so far that I've seen is just kind of like a big energy blob. And
Okay.
that kind of makes sense too.
It does. Yeah,
But
it's funny how we always whether you're talking about God or aliens or whatever, it's very common for us to always anthropomorphize things and to make them in our image, you know?
hmm
Whether it's aliens or whatever, which is kind of funny because that's something that like the Old Testament, God's always like, do not make God into your image or something, people,
yeah. Well, it's
And
funny
it's kind of
too.
funny to think how like even modern Christians or religious people constantly do that, where they have this like this idea of God that's like superhuman based, even though like the Bible's constant, like that's literally like the Ten Commandments, you know what I mean? But I think that gets at the fact that like whether you're religious or not, it's just that's what we do, right? We just it's even with like animals, people are convinced that their dogs are
hmm
that their dogs are having emotional experiences the way that they are, you know.
Yeah, no, it is definitely strange. And what's wild about that likeness type thing is like a lot of well, the Bible changed definitely from the Old Testament to the New Testament, and like
Yeah,
Genesis is one of those chapters that kind of changed a lot.
yeah.
Um,
Well, it's 66 different books, right? Like
right.
the author of Genesis would literally murder the author of First John if they were to meet each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like across all these centuries. It's funny how it was called the Bibles or the books for a long time, and then it became the Bible, which then became this like it's just interesting to watch how it changed from like, oh, there's a collection of books, and then we
Mm.
decide which ones get in, which ones don't. And then nowadays it's like, yeah, you just have people believing like this is the book that God wrote specifically for this purpose, and just all the assumptions that we've made are all. It's very interesting to me, but
Yeah.
sorry, different topic.
But no, but in those Old Testament books or whatever, and a lot of people, because we brought up before, like aliens, demons, and all that other shit, that makes
Yeah,
more sense being extraterrestrial or interdimensional things that we just can't explain. But then, if you really, if you can Google this too, there's many like depictions of what angels look like in the Bible, because they're not like human form. They're not like humans with wings. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
that became like a meme on the internet, didn't it?
Yeah,
Like biblically realistic angel, and
yeah.
it's like geometric
wild.
patterns.
Well, it's geometric
Yeah,
pattern, but like wild looking, winged
yeah,
eyeballs that are floating around and shit like that.
yeah.
And
Which adds up, right? Like whenever people encounter angels, there's always like, don't be afraid, and people are like collapsed on the ground, like
yeah,
screaming.
yeah, 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 yeah. No,
Definitely, people are very, very afraid. It's funny how often it's like, don't be afraid, and then you read it, and it's like people are extremely afraid.
yeah. But I mean, if a quote unquote monster showed up out of nowhere, I would be afraid, regardless. You know what I mean? A bear could show up in the woods, and I know what a bear looks like, and I'd be fucking afraid. It's just big
Yeah,
and large. But I mean, yeah, the interdimensional stuff is something that I don't know. I've asked questions about a lot of things, and I wasn't one to kind of like not believe that 9/11 was an inside job. I didn't really like when it happened many years ago, like 20 something years ago. I was like, oh, that is a fucking devastating terror attack. And then, of course, like, documentaries and movies come out saying that it was an inside job. And here I am going like, nah, not even going to go down that rabbit hole. That's not what happened. But as you get older and shit, I was so young at that time. I was like right out of high school and stuff. As you get older, I'm like, damn, how can it not be like that? Or, how can this not be like that? Like, what is the correlation between like aliens and religion, and why is it so different, and why are they like hiding aliens so much, like the
yeah,
government and stuff, like
yeah,
why is that a whole thing? And it's really interesting because like Ancient Aliens started coming out, and they started talking about the Anunnaki, and they started talking about like pyramids and all this other shit. And again, that is a show that's quite like Alex Jones, where like they have a lot in the beginning, they had a lot of cool things that
yeah.
were like, oh yeah, I could totally see that. But as the show went on, you're like, oh, this is just a
There's like
show.
some ridiculous stuff that makes it lose credibility to
Right,
where like
right.
it's like almost embarrassing to be like, oh, like I learned something from that, or I enjoy something about that, because people are like, oh, so you're an idiot.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what
Like, and
people
that's the thing.
think.
I
Yeah,
hate I hate bringing up Alex Jones because he has that bad stigma on him. You know what I mean, about like Sandy
yeah,
Hook and
yeah,
all the other shit. But like again, that don't lose the idea that like he also shed a lot of light on some things that were way out of left
yeah.
field before that ended up being true.
Totally. As much as the internet's taught us to think about things black and white, like same thing with like Joe Rogan or something, like Joe Rogan can have a bunch of great guests or whatever, and then could have some person who's, has a fringe theory that leads some dude who's watching it in Florida or
Mm-hmm.
NorCal, who knows, is watching it, and then like does some experimental thing and then kills themselves on it, and then everyone's like, oh, Joe Rogan's only this, and it's like it's easy for people to look for those gotcha moments where they can kind of oversimplify what something is. But yeah, in reality, I think everyone's complex, and any thinking person is going to be right and wrong a lot.
Yeah,
And I guess hopefully, we have the intellectual humility to admit when we're wrong, and also be able to say, I don't know, when we don't have answers.
yeah.
But that being said, yeah, it's I totally know what you mean with that, because a lot of what I've been reading and learning about stuff too is, yeah, it's just on podcasts or different weird, YouTube channels and stuff, and
But
it's
that is so discredited. Like those weird YouTube channels, those fringe channels and stuff like that. Like I get it, but a lot of people, it's wild because you and I, Garrett, are living in a time and an age where like the intake of information and media and everything is vastly different than it was 10 years ago,
yes,
20, 30, 50 years ago.
yes,
So like, my grandfather and my grandfather and my dad, right? They're from the generations of like the newsman said it, so it's fact. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
and I recall being like that too at a younger time. But then, again, certain things happened throughout our time being on this earth that we were like, that may not be exactly how it is. And the internet has also opened that up to like, us finding other sources, other, views and other ways that people are talking
yeah,
about things. So it's really wild how people do intake information or misinformation. And God, the misinformation thing is a whole different thing, not just speaking on COVID, but just in general. Which leads me to question a lot of things like, do people have a third eye? Do you think people have a third eye, and that's why we can't see other dimensions? Because I think like in the past, we may have been able to like do fourth dimensional stuff. This is so weird, but I know you've been down these rabbit holes, so you may also know something like this. But like,
Right. And then did our like pineal gland get calcified or something like
Yeah,
that?
like is the fluoride really, calcifying our brain so we can't really see what's real, in reality? And
I mean, one thing's for sure, we are I think that direct like purely physicalist explanations of human existence that don't account for the spiritual experience, it's weird. I do believe like the further that we go with like with science, we're gonna find more and more intersections between, more or less spiritual reality stuff that like a lot of ancient traditions talked about. And like, and I just think that the view that like, the only thing that's real is matter, and you can have all these emotions or whatever, but we're just complex animals, and love or like existence after life or whatever is just pure superstition. I honestly think when I hear that, I just hear a lot of Western hubris.
mm,
I think that science is obviously awesome. It's using scientific discoveries that we're able to have this conversation right now from different parts of the world. So I'm definitely not like a science is bad thing, or whatever, some simplistic like, oh, science is wrong. Science is a tool that helps us understand our reality, but it also doesn't. It can't, fundamental questions of like why and meaning and stuff aren't, that's kind of more the philosophy whatever realm, right?
yeah,
But I think as our ability to measure things and understand like energy and particle physics and just quantum physics continues to grow, we're going to find more things coming together, and we're going to find that I think a lot of ancient traditions, things that things that people believe for 5,000 plus years, there's a good reason,
yeah.
because I think that there is this like recency bias where people believe because we have science, because whatever, we no longer need, the superstitions of the past and stuff. And to some degree that's true. I think there has been a lot of, superstitions that kept people like bound, and created created hierarchies, that were oppressive towards humans, and towards growth. But as much as I believe that, I also think that we are so um unaware of the nature of our reality. Like for an example would be like dark matter,
Yeah.
right? Like most people believe that our universe as we know it is mostly comprised of this thing called dark matter, but we don't really know what that is. That's just a term that we are
Mm-hmm.
throwing at like everything.
It's just
We just
yeah, it's
don't
just
know what it is.
unexplainable things. We don't know what that
Yeah.
is, so just lump it in with that dark matter shit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually this I was recently listening to this video on this theory of the electric universe, the idea that our reality is actually like fundamentally uh that gravity is not the explanation for everything, that it's actually like electrical currents of different types of waves and stuff.
Yeah.
Um
That's
and
why they had to get
but
rid of Tesla because he was getting that free energy out of the air, and they were like, we can't do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
do that.
Actually, the podcast mentioned Tesla, and how like crazy ahead of time Tesla was.
Mm-hmm.
Probably more than anyone
Yeah.
ever. Maybe with the exemption of like, I don't know, Da Vinci or something. But it's it's pretty. It's funny how like I bring up the dark matter thing a lot whenever I'm talking to people who, have the classical like the Western like, yeah, sure, we don't know some stuff, but we pretty much know 99% of our reality. And I strongly disagree with that. And I think if
I would
if
too.
people were to get anything from this record that we're putting out as a concept record, whether or not they think there's some possible reality to what we're talking about or not, I just hope that there's like a humility. And I think that's kind of honestly runs through um I think the narrative of Silent Planet lyrics in general, whether it's been like talking to religious people or whatever, is there's a lyric in an older song of ours that says "trade your certainty for awe," and that's kind of, it's kind of become like the mantra of our band. I would say is just the idea of like, I think people will find more joy and more meaning the more that they're able to relinquish their ability to like have to be right and have all the answers about phenomenon, and instead be able to embrace the not knowing and understand that there's a beauty in not knowing. There's a
Mm-hmm.
beauty in living in a dynamic world that's evolving constantly.
Yeah.
And I think if we're being humble we start to see that, yeah, like there's we do know some stuff about our world, but for everything that we do know, I'd say there's 10 things that we don't know.
Yeah,
And
dude.
that I think if humans do manage to still be alive in this plane of existence, in this dimension, in this reality that we know of, if humans still do exist, and that's a big if, because you look at the state of the world and you're like, I really don't fucking know
Well,
if we're
yeah,
gonna
and
still be alive. When you just look at how broken and how like even how language is an ineffective tool to
yeah,
like problem solve, it's hard to know
yes,
if we're still going to be here because our technology is quickly outpacing like our ethical ability to tolerate each other.
right, right, right.
So big, all that to say, if we do still exist, if we still exist after, it's all said and done, I do think that uh, we will find that all of our assumptions about reality that we have right now will be like, oh, can you believe we used to think that, this was
Yeah,
the only way that gravity functions in the solar system? Whatever. Like
right. No, no, no,
we're just
right.
going to be humbled,
Yeah,
and that's okay. I just think the more that we're able to start with a posture of humility, the more we can learn. And I will say also that is in plus that is how science is. I think science should be handled with a dose of humility. It's just that I don't think the problem isn't science. The problem is us,
yeah,
is
oh,
our
for sure,
ego attachment to reality.
100%, 100%. I think the if and when those beings or entities or whatever they are traveling interdimensionally or via space and wormholes or whatever the hell they're doing to get point A to point B, I think they as a society or as a group of whatever don't necessarily have the same bickering issues as we do. Like
Yes.
like they don't have super big conflict. They may not even talk at that particular point. They may just communicate via
Yeah, just yeah.
another way,
Which is
whether it's
what a
mental.
lot of people say with their alien, especially the if you're familiar with the aerial school in Zimbabwe,
Hmm.
one of the largest mass, UFO um alien
Yeah,
encounters.
was that the one where they're on the playground and shit? They were on the
Yeah, it's in
playground.
Zimbabwe.
Yeah,
It was interesting because it was like a very wealthy. It was like it was in Zimbabwe,
it's a
but it
private
was
school.
students from all types of
Yeah.
backgrounds and languages. Because it was like an international school, had a lot of diplomat kids, I think. Um, and it was yeah, basically, yeah. The kids said that the beings were talking to them like telepathically. And what's crazy is to this day, pretty much, with the exception of I think one kid who
Yeah,
says
one
that
kid
he
was like
made it up
lying.
specifically,
Yeah.
everyone else still says like the same thing, which is kind of crazy. Like, to think about like just how many people have the exact same thing that they still are saying about the nature of the whole alien thing. That it's these kids kept their story the same, which anyone who knows kids or the psychology of kids, and they did have, Harvard's what's I forget his name. He was the Harvard guy
Hmm.
who went over there and said these kids are not lying. Like I don't know
Yeah, he was
what
like the
happened, but these kids are not
therapist
lying,
or
and this
some
is not a
shit.
joke.
He was like a therapist or psychologist or something like that.
Yeah, and he got
He was
he
award
got
winning before
he
all
got
this.
massively like railroaded by
Yeah,
Harvard, and it was this whole thing
but
of
I think
like,
he
oh,
had the
he can.
Pulitzer Prize or some kind of big ass,
Oh, he
award.
held all these awards and all these like positions, and then all of a sudden, like they were talking. Ultimately, Harvard was trying to get rid of him for a while, and then ultimately
Oh, yeah, he was tenured.
was he was reinstated. They dropped everything
Yeah,
and kind of accepted that it was a witch hunt. But he had been interviewing not just these kids, but other people who claimed to be other people who claimed to have these abductions, and his whole thing was basically going to the mental. He, as someone who was very prominent in the mental health world, he was basically saying you can't just say all these people have a form of schizophrenia and like be done with it.
yeah,
That's just simply not true. The people he was interviewing did not check those boxes, and he was basically the guy who stuck his neck out and said like, "There's whatever's happening here, we can't like it's not okay for us to just point and say mentally ill and move
yeah,
on. That's not true." And of course he was more qualified to say that than pretty much anyone in the world. So it was a big scandal for Harvard. But ultimately, I think he got his justice, and the uh, the hearings against him were dropped. And actually, I think some of the people who brought up the hearings were kind of later looked upon pretty unfavorably. But
Yeah.
yeah, interesting. All that to say, there's the telepathic thing is definitely a pretty common pretty common theme throughout it that and it's I don't know, man. You hear about like string theory.
Uh huh.
You hear about the way that like they could split things on like an atomic level and have one one piece over there in like Paris and another piece in New York and they move
Right.
simultaneously and that of course led to a lot of the dimension idea. Like these things are linked on a different dimension. So as we see it, Paris and New York are super far away, but in another dimension those things are still next to each other.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so and I think humans have experienced that emotionally, interpersonally for a long time. I think it's common for people to have had experiences where you just kind of know what's going on with someone, even when you can't prove it, or people wake up at 3 a.m. and it turns out that's when their friend had a heart attack or something. And
Right.
I think I think I think a lot of people, if we're being honest, we know that we're bound in a real way, not just like metaphorically or whatever, like in a very real sense, we are bound to each other, and
Yeah, and some
we
energy
just
way
don't
or
have the
some shit.
tools
Yeah.
to show it right
Right.
now. But y y I once heard someone say that the human mind has always been understood by the technology of the time. So like the Romans thought that the brain was like uh because they had aqueducts.
Mm-hmm.
Aqueducts is what like made Rome what really made the Roman Empire stand out. That was their great technology. That and roads. So they understood that the brain was like a series of different fluids that come in and out, and they understood it from like a yeah, like a flow perspective. And now we understand it from like a brain perspective. We understand everything, or we understand the brain from like a computer perspective. We understand
Right.
everything from a computer's perspective. So much so that, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, our most common view of reality is that we are in a simulation now. Like, I mean, Elon Musk said, a lot of people are saying that it must be like a simulation of some kind, and we think of it in computer terms. But it's funny how it goes full circle because, like, if you fall into the simulation thing, then you're not that far from a lot of deists, people that believe
Right.
in a god of a sense. Like but because you're saying that there's an intelligence that created this, that coded it,
Or
if you
controls
want to
it.
use
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
term, whatever, and that we are sort of we're within the matrix of something that was not a random cosmic thing, but it happened. And so I think for me that's where the alien thing becomes really interesting because it's not just about like, oh, are there things from other planets that are invading us? It's more like, no, if these alien things do exist, the footage that we're now seeing from the U.S. Navy, the testimony, if this stuff is real, I think it probably there's a good chance has a real implications of who we are, how we got here, why we're here, who brought us here. I think that is where my mind goes when I start thinking about
Yeah.
aliens.
I mean, there's my thought on that only got worse as like or I would expound on that stuff way more deeper.
Yeah.
I say worse as in like me wasting my time going down those rabbit holes more and more. So, but
So maybe better,
yeah, no,
depending on who
it's
you ask,
better.
right?
You know what I mean? But like, you don't want to tell everybody like, oh my god, I saw this video on flat Earth or what. I just use that as a topic. I don't believe in flat Earth or anything like that. But who knows? I don't know. I've never been to fucking space, so I don't know. But like when you go down those rabbit holes and stuff like that, it's like people like want to push back on that because they have a day job, they have their own like woes and stresses that come from the external world. But in the simulation, or being in a simulation, like that's just part of it too. Like you don't have to have a job, and like in theory humans have existed for quite some time without having to punch a 9 to 5 and
Yeah.
do this out of the other stuff. So that kind of is all like a new thing when you think about like human species. And a lot of people don't necessarily think about humans on like the species level of like where we are and like how we got to point whatever point we're in. So like
Yeah.
if you
Totally.
people may say that they're in a simulation because they hate their job or they hate their life or whatever, but um, it could be also be true. Could also be true. And the Matrix could be true. Everything could be true.
I mean, it is pretty wild. I think The Matrix, besides being, a good script and like a, a well executed film, I think it resonated with a lot of people because it's like one of those things that people see and they're just like, yeah, that's what I've been
Yeah.
experiencing,
And
sort
it's
of.
not so much like I don't think we're being like I should probably clarify. I don't think we're like being harvested and you can like unplug from the Matrix
That we're
and
batteries,
yeah,
right?
and you
Yeah.
can like live in the sewers and like that's like what humans have come to now. But who knows with AI and stuff like that, we could be going to that in 50, 100 years. I don't know, but AI could also take over all of our jobs, and the next thing you know, that's the first step in us like solving all kinds of conflict to us transcend to another
Yeah.
species level. So it could be that too. It's not all bad. It's some of it
No,
could be
no, not
good.
at all. I
Yeah.
I think it's I think it's actually yeah, I mean, yeah, on the topic of AI, I think AI could get really bad.
Oh yeah.
But in the immediate future, especially when you think of like healthcare and transportation and stuff, it's going to solve a lot of issues. If you think about like solving cancer,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, that's, if cancer in a lot of forms, I do believe will absolutely in the next 10 years be solved by artificial intelligence. So it's going to be, there will be a lot of good stuff that comes with it, even though I also think it could be inevitably bad because I think humans at our core are quite selfish and quite dangerous to our
Yeah.
environment
No.
and
Yeah.
I think it goes without saying that AI will be able to recognize that pretty quickly, and
Oh,
who
dude.
knows what they're going to want to do
That's
about
the
it.
problem with the AI because like if you and this is something that's very hard for a lot of people to swallow because they don't necessarily want to think of ourselves as this. But like if you were to look at like the Earth as a host, humans would technically
Yeah,
be the cancer, right? Because like
yeah, yes, yes,
nothing else on this Earth changes the Earth as much as we do, or destroys it as much as we do.
and
Um,
dominates it
right
and dominates what's on this earth.
now,
And
in that same breath, I also will say that a lot of people don't realize how big the Earth is too. And I'm not saying that we have a lot of Earth to fuck up, but there is a lot. There's just a lot out there, man, and there's a lot where people aren't out. You know what I mean? The humans aren't in every little nook and cranny. There's a fucking load of places where we're not for one reason or another. It might not be
oh yeah,
inhabitable for us, or it might just be hard to get to, or it might just be,
and that reminds me of like the fact that there are still tribes, not a lot,
oh
but there
yeah,
are still like tribes, in dense forests mostly that are still just like living in a tribal form of existence.
yeah.
And like they like have like satellites
But all
up there
that's
and
going on in
stuff.
the same little ball in space,
Yeah,
and then like,
yeah,
do you think those people think we're, what I mean? Those people could easily think we're aliens. You know what I mean?
totally.
We show up in a plane or a helicopter or some other
We are
thing.
cyborgs.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
will say that. If like fun, like I really do think if you really empathize with those people and see the world through their perspective, and then you look at how like a modern person lives and the fact that like
cell phone, Apple
this
Watch.
thing is pretty much always on them in some sense. We're cyborgs. Actually, I think I heard Elon Musk say that um, at some point, which I've referenced him a few times. I should mention, I think Elon Musk is incredibly annoying, and he definitely fucked up Twitter, and I will never forgive him for that.
But
I got to say that since I'm like promoting it, I
yes,
said
no, I know, and a lot of
I think he said some good stuff. I think he also just is
he's
kind of a
another
dingus. But yeah,
Alex Jones, Joe Rogan type guy. He's just
yeah,
I
yeah.
think Elon is a very brilliant person, and to be a very like brilliant person like that, of course, there's gonna be some things that don't go over as well, or and again, the Twitter thing, I don't necessarily know if I care that much about it. I
Yeah.
mean, yes, it's completely changed 100%, but like,
What fundamentally sucks, it's funny. I had this back and forth with a more conservative a person who's like more on the conservative political spectrum. He's like, "Oh, you just don't like him because because he does he promote, like, if you're just getting on Twitter for the first time, it's like promoting like Matt Walsh or whatever. Um, and to me, that's actually, it's not. I mean, it's annoying because like someone like Matt Walsh is,
Right.
and he's just an idiot. It is what it is. Like, I think we can all agree. It just makes stupid claims and expects the world to fall in line with his very small reality. But that is to say, the reason that I say that Elon Musk screwed up Twitter is it used to be like the thing that got the most likes would be like the first comment you would see.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was like a funny tweet, you would see a funny response, and it
Right.
was great. And now it's the people who pay for Twitter that you see their responses.
Yeah.
And that just, I think that fundamentally stifles the organic nature
Of
of a
course.
conversation when you have this artificial structure, like, oh, if you pay money, then people will like see your response. And let's be real, someone who wants to pay $8 to use an app that used to be free maybe is not as like funny or socially
Right.
intelligent as the dude from Counterparts.
Shout out,
um
Brendan. No,
shout out Brendan.
I
Yeah.
do get that, and yeah, that sucks because like I will say that's probably one of the most annoying things, the verification thing, because like Lambgoat was one
Yeah.
of the verified accounts on there prior to the exchange, and then now we're just like a paid account type of situation, which yeah, we'll pay for it just because it's
Yeah, totally.
we have to, but yeah, that's most of the bummer because I really do miss like that level of verification, because then you have accounts that have like 300, they're following 300 people, they have 10 followers, and they got a blue check mark, and they're just out here doing Lambgoat comments on Twitter or something like that.
Yeah.
It gets
Yeah.
wild. It gets pretty wild, but
Speaking of Lambgo, I feel like we there's something we got to talk
go
about,
for it.
the elephant in the room, if you will. So we're on the Vanflip podcast,
And you've had a Vanflip.
and I've had a Vanflip. I was like,
I know. I
I've
meant to
been
bring it
seeing-
up, but we were talking aliens for so fucking long. It just, you know what I mean? I was like, okay, we're just gonna
Yeah.
keep going, which
Well,
is fine.
I just had to say it's so funny because I don't know how long you've been doing the Vanflip podcast, but I don't think I noticed it until we are Vanflip, and then like Vanflip starts to be more like I literally can feel a Vanflip in my lower back every day.
Yeah.
And so it's fun. It's just I at some point I think I probably at some point I probably tweeted at some like to Lambgoat's Twitter account, like, are you gonna have me on your podcast or what? Like, like yeah. But so that comes from, correct me if I'm wrong, that comes from the whole, as the reviled comments, right?
Right.
The people, that Lambgo is like, it's a cool website. It's funny because everyone, including yourself, who I've met from Lambgo, is like a cool person. But Lambgo
Thank you.
has this reputation from the fact that it has an anonymous message board, and something that I actually respect, the free speech thing.
Thank you.
It's just like y'all allow the comments to stay up.
Well, there's there's guidelines. If they go against the guidelines, which a lot of people don't understand.
Okay, so what are the guidelines?
Well, I mean, they have changed. Because I don't know if you know, but I've been doing the podcast since 2018, right? So,
Okay.
It was a couple years prior to your Vanflip, but yes, it does come from comments like spanning back to like
I'm over here like, we flipped our van before. You're like, I
Yeah.
flipped a van before. It's cool. No,
Yeah,
I'm
no.
sorry. Okay.
No,
Sorry.
you
So
did,
you've
you
been
did it
doing
after we
this
put it on the map.
2018.
Yeah, we did 2018. The Vanflip podcast started, but that's because when I started working with Alex, the former owner, and I currently am the new owner of Lambgoats as of like a year and a half ago. So, but prior to that, when we were talking about names for the podcast, I was like, it has to be Vanflip because that's like
That's
one of the
the most
longest
common comment, right?
Well, it's
Is
one of
like
the
Vanflip.
longest running jokes. You know what I mean? And like, granted, there are situations like yourself or like other bands that get into accidents, and obviously that's not like the greatest fucking thing, but it is something that is kind of synonymous with Lambgoat. And
Yeah.
and I think like if you hear Vanflip outside of Lambgoat, people have no idea what you're talking about. But if you say it to
Yeah.
someone that's in the the environment of or in the universe of Lambgoat, which sounds weird, but they'll know what that is, and
Sure.
admittedly bands hate that. Bands aren't super, there's a handful of bands that don't enjoy the podcast or whatever, the title of the podcast, but it's like whatever. And yeah, I mean the guidelines for the guidelines for commenting and being on the message board, they've changed over the years, right? Because Alex, prior to me taking over, Alex was one man and he ran the website for like 23 years by himself. So he didn't have the the bandwidth to also work a full-time job and raise a family, because he had a,
and then like moderate the comments,
moderate every
between,
fucking
like,
comment.
his kids.
Yeah,
Like, oh, are my kids eating snacks? Oh, this person's threatening to kill someone.
Yeah, and there are definitely people, but again, I've said this, I say it all the time. You can go to any social media platform where you have to like get verified by your email address or get verified, put a picture up or whatever. And those guys, like our parents are leaving way worse comments on Facebook news stories than they are like, than people on Lambgoat are leaving on like news stories, that no one really sees, right? It's like the only people that really see the Lambgoat comments are the people that click into the Lambgoat comments, and usually they're somebody who's in another band, or there's somebody that's very familiar with the website. And then if they're not familiar with the website, like say we get a story that goes wild on Reddit for one reason or another, and people come to the comment section, they don't understand the commenting on Lambgoat, right? And I understand that, because if you're new to Lambgoat, you can get to the comment section and just be like, what the world is fucked. But it's also just like, I say it all the time, it's really bad comedians trying to make really bad jokes that are not funny. And 1% lands, and when it does, you're like, oh, that's a fucking good comment. That's a good one. You know what I mean? Just like on Twitter or something like that. The best.
Totally.
But so the guidelines have changed over time, and like the hate speech is basically one of the things that we'll definitely remove, and we'll definitely ban or there's a laundry list of words that are banned, but of course it's the fucking internet. There's different keyboards all over the fucking the place, right. So like there's ways to get around that stuff. But like in our tenure, we've tried to maintain, not in the guidance of free speech, but just because of Lambgoat, we want to maintain that kind of environment to where like that is somewhat allowed to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have. I don't. Yeah, I'm not offended. I don't know. I've never. I think you need to learn. I think anyone on the internet needs to learn to not be offended by the comments of an anonymous person, because I think if you're commenting anonymously, you've already kind of forfeited any sense of like real skin in the game, right? Like any sense of respect that would be earned. Like obviously, because if someone's gonna like be like, hey, this is my name, this is who I am, this is like what I do for a living, and then they share something, there's a certain level of credibility that I could see with that, where it's like, oh, this person has some skin in the game, like then like, yeah, if some guy, Joe Dingles, and he's a 42-year-old computer IT guy, and he's gonna be like, oh, this is me, this is who I am, this is where I live, and I hope that your Vanflips and you all die. It's unlikely that that'll happen, because he's aware that people will immediately be able to point at something in his life and be like, dude, you're a piece of shit. I think the anonymous thing shouldn't bother artists, is the way I see it, just because it's like, literally that's the point. Like people, you kind of expect people to say crazy things anonymously. That's why they're speaking anonymously.
Yeah.
And I think that the worst thing you can do is get upset about it or try to argue with someone, because like that's the point of like trolling, right? Is just to like see how far you can push somebody who does have skin in the game when you're someone who has no skin in the game.
But again, that discourse happens on any other fucking platform that you're interacting with people, and it's just, it could be Twitter user 123 or whatever, and he's still saying the same shit, and you're still interacting with it. That's the thing. Like, if I were to talk to bands, and I have, that are not fans of the comments or not fans of like Lambgoat in general, I'm like, a lot of people don't really want to see it this way, but the good far outweighs the bad of what Lambgoat has to offer. And like you said, everyone you've met, and that this is a relatively new thing too. Lambgoat hasn't been in the real world technically for like 20 something years, until like I started doing the podcast and showing up at places under the name Lambgoat. Alex before was, again, a busy individual and lived in rural Pennsylvania, didn't really do much outside of like just posting news or whatnot. But if I were to talk to any of those guys, it's like the good outweighs the bad for what Lambgoat has done and will do and continue to offer for
Yeah.
music and bands and stuff like that. And we aren't the comments. Just because we allow the comments doesn't necessarily mean we side with good, bad, or ugly comments. You know what I mean? It's just that's a part of Lambgoat. Like that's been a part of Lambgoat. So it's a nod back to a time on the internet that is probably, you know, long since gone, and you can live in that small world still in the comment section on Lambgoat.
Yeah.
But again, you have to click into the comments. They're not public. You know what I mean? So like in in reality, that's like your TOS, right? Terms of service of using the comments.
Yeah, yeah.
You got to go
Well,
in there and look for it.
No, it's funny thing, you know, I very early into I don't remember exactly when. It was kind of a daze. I had a moderate concussion that kind of led into a lot of weird stuff that kind of influenced the album. But I do remember making a joke. I don't remember exactly when. I like within hours of the Vanflip. I think it was like after I got back from the hospital. I went to the hospital. They did some brain scans. Had to staple my head together on the top, and then I was like, I think back with the band, and pretty early into it, I made a joke about I was like, well, maybe we'll get more coverage on Lambgoat now. And I don't know if anyone laughed. It might have been one of those like way too soon jokes, but
Yeah.
I figured I was allowed to make it because I was definitely the most physically fucked up by the accident. I can't speak emotionally. I think everyone was, but
Right.
physically, pretty fucked up by it. But definitely made a Lambgoat joke pretty quickly
Yeah.
into it, so I had to mention that.
No, no. I mean, and again, like as part of like taking over and being more involved in the day, not day to day, but
Yeah,
like in the real, like taking Lambgoat into the real life and offline type stuff. It's you see how ingrained it actually is with bands and with people in the industry, record labels, press people. It's like when we meet these people, it's like, oh my god, I've been going to Lambgoat forever. I love, you know, and dude,
yeah,
by
yeah.
all means, I'm gonna go on a limb and say like 99.5% of the people that go to Lambgoat have zero issues or like the comments. And like I've told people, it's like if people aren't commenting, whether it's negative or positively on your stuff, that should be more hurtful to you than people commenting negatively or positively on your
Oh,
articles.
totally.
You
Yeah,
know,
no, it's that. I think that in general, it's like that's something that artists should know, and if they don't, they need to learn. It's like if it's like if people have a lot of bad things to say about an artist, that's a really good thing for the artist because it means that they're perceived in such a way that it's not like the local band thing. So like, you know, when a band's super local and super new, they you only say nice things. And if you say anything bad about like a band that's like upcoming local band, you're like that's like the worst thing you can do because like, you know, it's a baby and who like, you know, who looks at a baby crawling around and like, you know, being like, you're slow, you're a baby. You know,
yeah,
it's like, yeah, you accept that it's just getting started. But once you get to a certain point that people perceive you to be like a public commodity, that's a really good thing because it means that you're out there enough that it's not just all like warm level, like friends and
right. They're
family that
seeing
are
you enough that
encouraging
they're
it.
annoyed by it, and then they're going to come and say something
Yes.
about it. But hey, you've won, and it's just like art. Art is subjective. You're not everything is going to be positive, and you know, roses and gold roses all over the place.
Right, right.
There's going to be some negative feedback. But again, those are like badges of honor. Like if you've gotten to the level where you're getting trashed on Lambgoat, that's
You've
probably
kind
a
of
good
made it
thing.
in
That's
some
probably a
way.
good
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. And again, like people rolled their eyes when I've said that, and that's hilarious. But it is what it is, and that's someone that's just not really familiar with Lambgoat because they've avoided it for so long, right? Like they know it's out
Yeah.
there, and they assume that like Lambgoat sides with the commenters or that we are the comment. Like it's synonymous, but they're two separate things. It's the audience and
Yeah.
the product.
And
Right?
I will admit, I think I had that bias. I mean, I didn't think y'all were like sociopaths. I just figured though, whoever runs Lambgoat probably is like, yeah, kind of in that vibe. And then I remember, yeah, a few different times. Were you at the Jacksonville show that we played
Yeah.
like a small Jacksonville show last year?
Hmm.
And just a few times I've had any interactions, you know, with people associated with Lambgoat, and I'm like, oh, it's like meeting a nice journalist from anywhere,
Yeah.
and yeah, it is funny though, because I think early on I'd see that thing and be like, oh, that's the vibe. But no, it's just that there's a core group of people who have, I think, embraced this like troll mentality,
Right.
in the comment section. And who knows? I'm sure the majority of those people are like probably really nice, normal, tame people in real life, and that's like a little LARP. That's like a LARP thing they do or something.
Maybe it could also be someone just still lives with their parents at 45 years old and they're just fucking hating life in the bottom of their basement. And that's how I like to look at them. That's how I like to think about them.
Yeah,
But and
that's fair. Yeah,
it is what it is. And bands sometimes bands don't want to be featured on Lambgoat, and that's cool. But I don't necessarily respect those wishes because you know the guys and I have like a duty for the most part. Like we really care about hardcore metal and all this other stuff, right? And growing the
yeah,
scene and
totally.
making it more not acceptable, but people available for people. And
Yeah,
in order to do that, you got to take these lumps. And like, it's not like we're fucking trying to harbor like hate speech in the fucking comments or anything like that. It's just part of the game. And like, bands don't want to have their stuff featured on Lambgoat, so they won't send us press releases. But like, that's not going to stop me from posting about it, because again, I have a
yeah.
duty. I have a duty to
It,
catalog and data all that, right? So
Yeah, and it's funny that, yeah, I don't know. I'm definitely on the other side where I just like um I just appreciate I just appreciate y'all covering bands. I mean, I Lambgoat was definitely one of the first websites to notice our band, and like you said, it's like, yeah, I would way rather have some person be like, Christian band, hope they flip, even though we're not a Christian band. And I'm sure deep down they probably don't actually want strangers to die for no reason.
no,
But
I would assume most people don't.
regardless of the fact, even if they do, it's like I've appreciated that y'all, covered our band, because that's something you don't, if you've done this thing as long as I have, you just don't take for granted
Right.
somebody giving even a tiny fuck about what you do. You don't take that for granted, when you've, played bar venues and house shows, and just the most DIY touring that we
Right. Right.
did for
Right.
like
Right.
for
And
4 or 5 years, like where like if you have enough money to eat, that was a successful night. So when
yes.
you get covered on the internet, it's just like that's awesome. And I think people who don't understand that kind of makes me wonder if like maybe they skipped a step or something.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
and the
know.
other thing too is like, and I'm not saying that we are the end all be all, like what's good or what's bad, right? Like, but if you get on Lambgoat, like not everyone, dude, the amount of people that send shit to us is insane, right? So the amount of things that we can cover is like infinite, right? So we can cover anything. Like we get so much new music, new bands, new everything sent to us. We get so much shit that's like sent to us outside of hardcore and metal too, and we don't cover a lot of that
Yeah.
stuff. But like we select who we do and don't cover for the most part, like and then there's no like rhyme or reason behind it. It's just like if a new band comes up and like I listen to the song and I'm like, oh, that's Lambgoat worthy or something like that, I'll just throw it up on the website, right? And a lot of people, you know, look at that like, oh, this band's on Lambgoat now. And in that aspect, there are some bands that have never been posted about on the internet before. We'll start posting about them, and then
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we are Lambgoat, next thing you know, all the other 10 outlets out there are not copying, but now they know about Band X. And I've seen
Yeah,
that.
the fact that you covered them, get it kind of legitimized them in some
Right.
sense.
Now, and if you do have a van flip, or if you do have some fucking bad thing happen to you, Lambgoat's definitely going to post about it. But also, like, we're going to promote the GoFundMe's or, like, the
Yeah, yeah.
whatever else, to need to happen. Because, like, again, it's not, we're not out for fucking blood.
No, no, not at all.
We're trying
No,
to
it's
we're trying to make more people get into heavy fucking music. That's it. That is the bottom line.
it's it is funny to think though. There's got to be someone in the comment section who's like, "We did it, boys."
Yeah. They're talking about the comments
That
again.
happened. I definitely, it's funny. It goes to show, yeah, like you said, the Vanflip thing became at some point, it's kind of like this monolithic thing or something, because it's like, I thought of Lambgoat when our van flipped,
Just
like that's
crawling
it's
out,
a
just
weird
crawling
thought.
out, with bloody head, going, "Oh, this is going on the website now."
Yeah, yeah, it was something I forget. It was something about Lamb. I forget. I think I might have said something like, well, at least the Lambgoat comment people finally got what they wanted or something. So just some joke. I made some joke about it at our expense, um, pretty quickly into it, to my bandmates, and but and it goes. I mean, what matters, aside from like crazy comments and stuff, is like just the community, and the fact that like what Lambgoat does helps. I think the community to exist, that y'all cover smaller bands, up and coming stuff. I think a lot of the publications that are supposed to cover like metal and whatever kind of more only focus on like the extremely more rock slash like pop leaning type of
It gets
metal.
the clicks,
and,
Garrett. It gets the
and your
clicks.
place, I think, is part of why it's such a crazy place. Is you have a lot of members of like specifically the hardcore community. Like you see like a Lambgoat post about Terror, like have a crazy amount of
Right,
comments
right.
about like the vocalist or whatever.
Scott
and
Vogel here.
and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, Scott Vogel here, and those are definitely, I think, by far the funniest ones, by the way. But I think that it goes to show that that's where the actual like the actual heavy community, a lot of it is,
Right.
because I have no beef with the rock sounds or the alt presses, but I think they had, I think every publication has a choice on like what it's going to cover, and I think a lot of those publications so constantly took the most like, yeah, most popular, most kind of like pop leaning versions of most pop leaning like iterations of metal,
Right.
I think, over and over and over again, until like it seems like, yeah, they would only want to cover something that's more Panic at the Disco, and wouldn't want to
Yes.
cover wouldn't want to cover like Viljarta very much.
Right, right. And the thing is with that, and to touch base on that, because I don't get to elaborate about that in long form, especially on this podcast. But like, money makes the world go round, right? And like,
Right, right.
that's just the nature of the beast. So like, we could definitely cover Disturbed, cover more Sleep Token, cover all these other bigger bands that are just like killing it all the time. There are big bands that we do cover, like Slipknot and stuff like that, and maybe like
Yeah,
Limp Bizkit, but like that's very few and far between for the most part, and that's not necessarily
totally.
like our vibe as an outlet. But
Right, right.
everyone that visits the website at some point or another has listened to Slipknot, so that's the reason why we just cover one of those types of bands. But
Yeah.
you know, the reason behind those bands, and like we don't even post article, and I'm sure you've seen it out there, but for like people who are um you know clueless to it, like we don't even really post like so and so said this on podcast X, like we don't even fucking post articles like that. And a lot of that
Yeah,
stuff is
yeah.
just easy banner ad, like they want to more
Oh, it's
ads.
easy clickbait to
Yeah,
like, yeah, like be like,
more
yeah,
ads, more
Corey
this,
from
more that.
Slipknot thinks that rock is dead, or something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Or like, we're never gonna get Taylor Swift money. No fucking shit, dude. That's something that you didn't have to say. Like, we all know
Yeah, yeah.
you're not getting Taylor Swift money.
Yeah, yeah.
But so we, like we all do this full time currently, and like it is enough to barely get by, for us as like people. But like the goal is to not ever really cover that stuff. To really just grow our audience. To really just make, because again, like I've told you, there are other websites that follow us, and they've told us in person they follow us to find new bands, to know what to post about, to whatever's cool, this, that, the other shit. So that was cool, and that lets us know that we're on the right path, and that we've taken Lambgoat in the last year and a half, 2 years, and we've moved it into a different space, hopefully, and that's what we plan to do. Just keep growing in a way that we maintain like our independence, because a lot of these other outlets are also owned by, whether it's a record label, a conglomerate of like Sony, or other corporate entities. So like it's just fucking three dudes for the
Yeah.
most part. Just
It's actually independent.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're super independent. And we want to keep it that way, but we also want to grow it into a bigger entity as well. Not saying that we're going to go corporate or anything like that, but like in order to do certain things, we do need to make money to fund those things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But we're not going to. And a lot of people, one of the best comments posted these days are like $50, and that's because they're just like joking, like it costs $50 for them to post this article on, like this band paid $50 to get their band on
Oh,
on the
okay, yeah,
news
yeah.
post or something like that. And that's not the case. There are ways that you can be featured, and yes, you can pay for like reviews. But that's just because like our review schedule is already set. So if you want to pay
Oh,
for
yeah.
something outside of that, yeah, you're going to have to pay for the writer's time. Not for it's not it doesn't go to
Yeah,
us. It
totally.
goes to the writer.
Yeah.
But so there are ways that you can be paid to be featured, but it's not like people think. And yeah, that's just basically what we're doing. We're grinding it. We're just gonna grind it, make it bigger. We're always in it for the little man because that's where we came from. Like all of us came from the scene, whether it's a
Yeah.
band,
Yeah.
photos, or whatever. Growing up in it, that's just what we did, and so that's what we want to maintain. Lambgoat has 25 years of doing that. We want to do it for another 25
That's
years,
sick.
and we want to do a lot more like content outside of the Lambgoat, outside the website. So that's where we're at. And yeah, I know you got food waiting on you, so I don't want to keep you.
Oh, dude, I just yeah, I want to say thank you for having me. It's been really rad. Like this is definitely one of my favorite ones I've done in a long time. And yeah, just yeah, Dave, I appreciate you. And thanks for like again, like I said earlier, thank you for covering us at a pretty, I remember, pretty early juncture in what we do as a band. And means a lot. And thanks for yeah, I guess in advance, because I'm pretty sure y'all probably post about it. Thank you for Superbloom checking it out. What, I don't know what the review will be. Maybe it'll be like, this is the most ass thing I've ever heard in life. Who knows? But regardless, I appreciate y'all giving us a platform.
No, I appreciate your outlook on not only life, but in what I do and what the brand is. And I appreciate that you take it with, you take it for what it is, and you intake it the right way. There's a lot of people that don't, so I appreciate that. And
Well,
I
hey, if some artist gets on a high horse about you calling it Vanflip, you can reference this conversation
stick
and be like,
stick.
that guy's back is permanently fucked up by a
Yeah,
Vanflip, and he's okay.
you
So
should stick around when I end this. Just stick around for 5 more minutes, and we'll get into that. But yeah, so I just want to thank you for that. I know we talked very little about Superbloom, but kind of we talked about it a lot if you really think
we
about
did.
it.
Yeah, I think the background,
Yeah.
the framework for it. Superbloom is based on a specific story of someone who went missing in 1996 in Humboldt County. But the overall yeah, the overall, just like kind of what drew me into it, and the background behind it. So it's yeah, I'm really glad that we could talk about it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no
Appreciate it.
problem. And I'll see you next time you're in town for sure.
Yeah, see you soon.